12. So this is going to be the video on the economy of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Compared to our last couple of dot points, this is going to take a few more lessons. So there are the terms for you, some of the definitions. Again, I'm not going to read them all out. Just pause it if you need to so you can go through those in your own time. So at the end of the day, both of these cities are very locally based. Because they're very close to the ocean and rivers, fishing's pretty important. Most of the time they can make their own products and sell their own products. So you've got, like, as we're going to learn about, you've got things like bakeries and like almost ancient laundromats and ancient fast food places that specialize in something and can sell that. When we are going over the forum in Pompeii, we don't find a forum in Herculaneum. We've only uncovered about 1/5 of that city. So in our lifetime, you're not going to see the rest of the city. We do have a forum uncovered in Pompeii, which is essentially the center of all life. Both cities, particularly Pompeii, is quite a bustling city. Okay, it would have had a lot of people there. It's got a lot of people working. The fact that we have uncovered 600 shops so far in Pompeii is evidence in itself that Pompeii had a very healthy economy. Okay, so 600 shops have been uncovered. And just super quickly, wealth is a sign of being looked at kindly by the gods. Okay, the role of the forum. The forum is the center of life in Pompeii. You've got it's connected to the economy, it's connected to religion, it's connected to politics in Pompeii. So as you can see with the map here, this is the map of Pompeii. We've got the forum located there. Okay, this is like your would have been like your marketplace as well in one section, the Macellum, that is. Okay, so merchants would have gathered here, sold an array of goods. They would have set up little market stalls around the outside of the forum here that you could have gone and bought things and sold things and all of that kind of stuff. So the Macellum, which as you can see in this map is located here, that's your main food market. So you've got plenty of smaller shops and stalls, which we think is actually the fish market, because we actually find some fish bones buried at the Macellum as well. So we actually think the Macellum, if you've heard of Sydney fish markets close to the city, it would have been very similar to that kind of idea. So you've also would have had smaller shops and stalls around there again. Very close to here is what's called the Olatorium. Okay, it's quite close. There's an archaeological find called the Mensa Ponderaria, which essentially is this device that the Pompeians would have used to pour in quantities of stuff and measure it and make sure everything was equal. So if you were pouring in grain to sell it for a certain amount, they would have poured it in to kind of test how much it would have been worth and like the quality of your goods were. So again, we've uncovered around 600 shops in Pompeii, which shows a very, very healthy economy. Okay, we've got a lot of food shops. You've got things called thermopolia, which is essentially an ancient version of fast food. Like, this is their version of a McDonald's or a KFC. You could turn up, sit down, and you can see in the picture there, that's where they would have put the hot plates that you could just sit down and have a quick feed with your friends. Okay. We've got a huge amount of wine bars and taverns around Pompeii, and Herculaneum as well. So the fact that it was quite common, as you know, similar to Australia, it's very common to go out with your friends and have a bit of a drink. Same thing here. We find a huge amount of bars and taverns, particularly close to the gates, which means that tourism would have been very good to visit the city of Pompeii, visit one of the taverns, maybe stay the night somewhere, and then head home. Okay, so we've got a lot of industries, and I'll try and go in the order of most important industries. The first one is wine and olive oil. So wine and oil is essentially the main sources of income for the region. Okay, so if you were like rich enough to have your own kind of farm, you could own a plot of land. Sometimes you didn't even have to stay there. Someone else would run it for you. But you'd own a plot of land and maybe build a nice luxury villa on it. and it would have your wine press and olive press on the land, and you'd potentially have workers or slaves that you would have hired to make that stuff for you. Okay? As I said, sometimes you can be wealthy enough to actually create a villa that you could live on, such as the rich Pompeian banker Caecilius Jucundus. In terms of the villas and farms, but they're mainly set up for production. Okay, so we see them. There's a storing food in the barn, or the torcularium, which is essentially like an outhouse or like an additional shed where the press for the wine and oil would be kept. Okay. And obviously at some of the villas, we also find like a very small room for them to put all of their slaves or workers to sleep the night. Okay, we've got fishing and garum. We spoke about garum already as that really gross fish source that Pompeii was famous for. Being so close to the ocean, fishing is really, really important in both places. Skipping to Herculaneum, we find things like metal fish hooks and nets and wooden boats in Herculaneum, which tells us fishing is pretty important. Garum is used. Garum, think of it like an ancient Pompeian version of like tomato sauce. They would have used it with their meals as like a bit of flavouring. And as I said before, we find evidence of there being a bit of a fish market at the Macellum. Okay, the other one is cloth and textiles. You could kind of clean your own clothes or your sheets and stuff at home, or you could have a bit of a workshop or go and get your stuff, pay to have your stuff cleaned. And they're known as fulleries. Okay, we do find fulleries at both Pompeii and Herculaneum, which essentially you can either get your clothes washed or they can even dye it a different colour. Okay, bakeries. We've got at least 30 bakeries that we find in Pompeii and 2 that they've found so far in Herculaneum. Bread's a pretty important part of the diet for people there, and it's inconvenient to make. So bakeries could make a lot of money making this important kind of food for people rather than them having to make it themselves. Yeah, that's basically it. There's nothing too much. In class, we'll go over a little bit more about the bakeries of Pompeii. Okay, the awkward one, Year 12. So this is one of the big industries in Pompeii and not so much Herculaneum, was the sex industry or prostitution. Essentially, men set the values at the time. So the idea of a man visiting the local brothel or tavern, there wasn't really a stigma attached to it. It was just okay to do it. But sex is a pretty large industry in Pompeii. If you were wealthy enough, you wouldn't necessarily have to visit an establishment. You could kind of privately invite a woman to privately come to your home, or they could use one of their slaves. We haven't found as of yet any brothels in Herculaneum, but as we'll go over in class, we've found a couple. We've found one really, really big one in Pompeii, but we'll speak about that in class. Super quickly, pottery and metalwork. Pottery is pretty important in ancient times, and Pompeii is no different. A lot of the stuff we find in Pompeii was made in Pompeii, and you've obviously got metals as well: iron, copper, bronze, silver, gold. That could be made for jewelry. It could be made for tools and trades and stuff like that. Okay, so we do find a couple dozen metal workshops in Pompeii as well, and only one has been found in Herculaneum. Guys, for occupations, I've pretty much covered like at any of the industries and workplaces that I've already covered, but we also find there's evidence of things like stonemakers, gem cutters, plumbers, plenty of other painters, plenty of other occupations that people might have had, that you even think of today people might have had at the time. Okay, and we even got evidence of there being a bit of a perfume industry. So once again, some of the main points is things like the role of the forum and the Macellum marketplace. And if you have any questions, we'll go over some of those in class. Thanks, Year 12.